Welcome, everyone, to Creating a Family. Talk about adoption and foster care. I'm Dawn Davenport. I am the host of this show as well as the director of creatingafamily.org. Today, we're going to be talking with a mom and son duo about transracial adoption and about what they have learned in their journey. We will be talking with Isaac and Julie Etter. Isaac is an activist and social entrepreneur. He was transracially adopted at the age of 2. He is the founder of Identity, which is a startup focusing on using technology to help adoptive and foster parents. He has used his story of being adopted and growing up in a white world to curate deep conversations about race in America. And Julie Etter is Isaac's mom. She is also the mom of 4 other children and a humanities teacher. And she is excited to be a grandmom now to Isaac's son. So welcome, Julie and Isaac, to Creating a Family. We're so glad to have you both on to talk about your experience in transracial adoption.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us here.
All right. So, Isaac, I guess it would help start telling us your adoption story from your perspective. Why were you placed for adoption? Where were you the first 2 years? Where were you raised? Just in general, what is your story and from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for having us here today. For me, I was placed for adoption when I was 2. After my birth mother tried to raise me for 2 years, battling, multiple things related to poverty. And so, though that is a sad story, it is also, a common story of how children end up in our system. And so that's really the circumstances that led me to being placed for adoption. And then I was adopted within the same year, divine timing as it is. My adoptive parents were headed right to the agency around the same time I was being placed. So within about a year, I believe, I was adopted by adopted parents.
Actually,
shortly after. Yeah. So month.
So you were only in foster care about a month, and then you were placed in an adoptive home at that point.
I believe so.
Yeah, we happened to walk into the adoption agency the day he was dropped off there. And so with a month, now the adoption was not finalized for a year. So he was technically our foster child for about a year. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it is. Okay, Isaac, so you were...
pretty crazy.
Yeah, that is. Talk about the odds.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, then, shortly after I was adopted, maybe give it like 2-3 years, we moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, known for Amish people, a little bit more rural, a little bit more country. And, my dad and my mom have both taught for classical Christian schools, my whole life, not the most diverse area. So we grew up with, I grew up not really feeling like I saw people around me that looked like me that weren't also adopted. And I think that led to some challenges as I grew into an adult. But I think that's kind of the baseline of how I got here.
And Isaac, are you the only member of your family adopted? Or are there other adopted children?
I am not. So youngest is also adopted. He's about 10 years younger than I am. So he is, I believe, just entering high school this year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. And is your brother also transracially adopted? Your younger brother?
Yeah, technically, yeah, he is. He is Hawaiian, and so Pacific Islander.
Okay, interesting. Okay, now Julie, what was your motivation for adopting? It sounds like you had 3 children. So what led you and your husband to consider adoption for adding to your family?
So Isaac is our oldest. And we had 3 children after adopting him.
Yes, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So we had always talked about adoption. It was just something that we wanted to do. My husband and I are very, just have always had a love for other people, for people who don't have a voice, I guess you could say. And so always knew that we would probably adopt. We, just like many young couples, started to try to have children early. In our 20s, we were young and went through a lot of infertility that was unexplained. And I just remember the doctor telling me one day, I don't know why this is happening. We don't have an answer, but if you want a child soon, I would suggest adoption. And that wasn't devastating news for us because like I said, we always wanted to adopt. So we thought, okay, we'll do that. It's interesting because I was ready immediately. My husband, probably less naive than I was, at the time said, we probably need to mature a little bit before adopting. I, unbeknownst to him, made an appointment with the adoption agency for information, just to ask questions.
That's the gateway drug, by the way.
Right. And so we showed up at the adoption agency on May 9th, and Isaac had been dropped off that day. And at that time, this particular agency really only dealt in infant adoptions. And they said, we have this 2-year-old that was dropped off today. This is just an example of the kind of children that would be available. And we left there, and I told my husband in the parking lot, we had not even left. I said, I feel like he is my child. If you are not interested, tell me right now. And long story short, because they did not deal in adoptions of children who are not infants, they really rushed us through the system, which in hindsight was probably not wise. But they didn't want him in foster care. He already had been in 3, even within a month, had been in foster care for 3 different homes. So they just wanted him to get into his final place. So yeah, he was with us on June 9th. And then I think you asked if we had other kids. We knew that we wanted to adopt again. We didn't want Isaac to be the only adopted child in our family, and did not mean to wait for 10 years, but went on to have 3 biological kids in the middle there. And none of them really planned, because we didn't think we could have children, but it just kept happening. And so then finally Micah fell into our laps 10 years later. So yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
And Isaac has already mentioned that it was a fairly homogeneous environment. What were the racial demographics of your community?
So when we first adopted him and lived in Virginia, we were in Fredericksburg, Virginia, just like a suburb of DC. And so that was a pretty diverse area. And we went to a church that was pretty diverse. So it was, Isaac was exposed to all different kinds of minorities on a regular basis. My husband, when he was 6 years old, my husband found a new job, and we moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And then, as Isaac said, I remember Isaac saying at one point to me when he was little, "Why did Dad have to find a job in the whitest place in America?" And at that time, that was really true. And it's still kind of true of Lancaster, in that the rural areas are very white. Like we could go weeks without seeing a minority, which was new to all of us. In the city of Lancaster, it's very diverse, because we were actually a very friendly city to refugees. And I don't know if that's changed since we've moved here, or if our community that we fellowship with has changed since we've moved here. It's probably a little bit of both. But it is true that through Isaac's teen years, we didn't fellowship a lot with the people in the city, or for no other reason than just our paths never crossed, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Julie, what were you taught about transracial adoption before you adopted? I'm taking it that you did not go in specifically saying that you were only open to transracial. Was that something that you had thought about before you saw the adorable 2-year-old that was Isaac?
Yeah. So nothing. We were really taught nothing about it. Like I said, we were rushed through the system. So we had 1 day of classes on adoption. We came in, I believe, I've never dated this to prove this, but we came in on what was kind of the tail end of the colorblind era, that you can just love kids through their abandonment. And if you don't see color and they're never treated any differently, then everything's going to be fine. Mm-hmm. And we did specifically say that we would take a child of any race. But again, naively, we're not educated, and that would not have changed our answer. But I certainly wish we had had more education, or any education. And yeah, so we really weren't. We did ask his birth family, his grandmother specifically, are there things that we can do to preserve his culture, or that you guys would like for us to continue to teach him, either about your culture or your family? And again, I think, and maybe it's generational, she had the same answer: just love him. We just want him to be in a loving home. And so that's where we went naively. Yeah.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
we do better when we know better, to misquote
Right.
or paraphrase Maya Angelou. Yeah, so that's, yeah. Let me pause here for a minute to tell you about a free educational resource that we can offer thanks to our partnership with the Jockey Being Family Foundation. We have 12 free online courses for you, our precious listeners. When you go to bit.ly/JBF support, that is bit.ly/JBF support, all one word, you can scroll through the titles and you can access them free. They normally have a cost associated, but once you click on them, that cost will be deducted at the checkout, and so they will be free. You can also get a certificate of attendance or a certificate of completion if you need any type of CE credit. So, Isaac, how did you identify racially? First of all, as a young child, and then and did things change as you got older? How was your experience being the only child of color in your environment and in your family until your brother came along?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, always as Black to a degree, right? The idea that I was different racially than my family, than a lot of my community, was always apparent. It was always a part of who I was. There were seasons of my life where it was a big joke and I was trying to kind of cushion it through humor. There were seasons where I was really insecure about it. And then I also had, two friends who were also adopted and Black and biracial. So I think we all felt Black, but not Black at the same time, if that makes sense.
Give me an example of what you mean by cushioning it with humor. I think that is not an uncommon way to try to handle something.
Yeah.
So give me an example of what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of distinctly remember my parents sitting me down after youth group one time because I think it was just it was racial jokes, right? You have no context for racism, or what that means. And so race-based humor was something that, I thought was a cushion for my experience. And I don't know if I have a great example, but it'd be I can do this because I'm Black, or
okay.
X is possible because or Black people do X. And I think that, that's some of the things that I look back on now. It can kind of, even though it wasn't apparent to me then, I can see that I was trying to make sense or soften this kind of difference that I felt from my community. And I think you're right. A lot of adoptees do it.
Mm-hmm. I remember, Isaac, and you've probably never heard this before. Your dad and I actually went to the youth leader. We called a meeting and said, we feel like Isaac's kind of being bullied with racial jokes and things like that in youth group. And the youth leader's response was, oh, well, Isaac, he's the first one to joke about it. He's the first, and I remember saying to him, well, that's kind of 101 of working with teenagers. They joke about what they're insecure about. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember exactly what you're talking about, Isaac. Yeah.
That's interesting. And you're right. Tell the joke first, because if you tell it, then they're laughing with you, not at you. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just think that really was how I coped. And it really wasn't until my senior year of high school that I really thought of myself as a Black person that wasn't necessarily also white.
Mm-hmm.
You almost have a little bit of racial confusion as a transracial adoptee, especially if you don't know many Black people. So I kind of felt simultaneously white and Black at the same time, really up until my senior year of high school, when I was learning about modern racism, and we see things like Black Lives Matter emerging and things like that.
Okay, before we get to, I'm curious about that. Before we get there, what was your school experience like? I'm assuming since you were in a white community, it was mostly a white school. But anyway, what was your school experience?
Yeah, so I only went to private school till about second or third grade, and then my family started homeschooling us. I had learning issues. Kind of very typical actually of foster and adopted youth, just academic struggles. I went to a very rigorous private school that really wasn't set up to deal with the way that I learned. So I think my parents brought me to homeschool probably for third grade until I graduated high school. Now we did have co-ops and like classes, and I also
Mhm.
took online school classes. And so all of those spaces were white unless they were adopted, to be honest. And so like those there were people of color, but we were all adopted. And I believe that I believe there was only like one family that wasn't. And so that was really my school experience, you know. So though I felt different, there was also kind of like this like, well, like, you know, we're the adopted kids that are here. And so it didn't like, you know, I had friends, I had good friends all my years of high school. I had great friends my senior year of high school. I didn't think that it deterred me from finding a community or friends, but I think personally it left me in an interesting position to try to like fit in and navigate a lot of different things. You know, I wasn't necessarily super athletic in high school. And so like that was kind of like a confusing thing, you know, a lot of comments about like I should be able to do X because I'm black.
Mm-hmm.
So I was navigating situations like that in high school, and really just, you know, trying to navigate being really the one of, we'll say like 4 to 5 black people, and 4 to 5 black people ranging from like elementary to high school,
Mm-hmm.
not like just high school.
And most of them were adopted as well.
Yeah, all but you know, there's one girl there was one family who I remember like they were the black family that's somehow was not adopted. Their dad was a pastor, and that's the black family that I remember growing up around. I'm still friends with her to this day. You know, I see her around Lancaster and we still chat. But yeah, they were the black family that was there. I think they were the only black people in our community that weren't adopted.
So did you experience, Isaac, racism growing up?
I'm sure my mom can lay more context to that than me.
Well, I'm going to ask her next. So yeah, I thought I would start with you
but
to honor your experience
I
first, but I'm going to ask her second. Yes.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, in my eyes, yes and no, which is that I'm sure I did. I'm positive I did, and I'm sure micro ways like sports, rapping, like all these kind of like stereotypical black things that I wasn't. I always got reminded of them. And sure, that's the kind of like a micro way of racism. But growing up, I don't think I even really had the framework for racism. And so, you know, I can remember things now that seem racist, like that I played a slave in 2 musicals, or, you know, things that were said to me by teachers and friends. And, you know, at the time, you know, as a kid, in growing up, like this is your only experience. So you don't necessarily have the context for like race and racism when your life has kind of been preached colorblind. So I was kind of like steered in this direction that it's like not because of race. And so, you know, obviously now looking back that's not true. And I know that my mom has had a very different experience on the other side trying to protect me.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, and from my perspective, you know, I didn't look at any like major racism that happened to me. Certainly comments, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Julie, what was your experience as Isaac's mom, being the adult in the situation? Did you see things differently?
Yes. The joke in our family is that I'm like the fiercest mama bear. So I'm all about protecting my kids, you know, and unwisely, I think now, again, hindsight, I did a lot of protecting Isaac. So things as simple and on the micro scale, probably as having people refer to him as one of them, or, you know, using the them and they as, you know, the group of black people.
As a collective, yeah.
Yeah. Or having friends and family be surprised that, oh, well, Isaac's black and he doesn't say a word this way, or he doesn't do that, you know, and a lot of that. Yeah. So a lot of that happening to policies at the school or the different organizations that we, you know, had him while we were homeschoolers. We are a very extroverted family. So we never believed that we were going to homeschool our kids and keep them in a bubble. So they were involved in so many things. And always, you know, I'm not going to say 100%, but I was often going, and Isaac actually is just finding out about this recently. I've been telling stories about different boards or people I would go before and say, look, these are racist policies. I'm not going to have my son commit to these policies and things. So I was doing that on a pretty regular basis, and then just the very typical that you hear about going into stores and, people following him around, but not his white brother, that kind of thing. Things like, I had to I don't know if I had to, but I confronted a group of parents one time when his friends on his 16th birthday. This still bothers me so much. And Isaac's always telling me, I think you think about this more than I do. A group of his friends put fried chicken and watermelon on our front porch on his 16th birthday, thinking that was a really funny joke. And I let all of their parents have it after doing that. But I just protected Isaac from all of that. I thought that I was, keeping him from being hurt. And I guess that was a very short-sighted view of,
Yeah, well, yeah, but yeah, and for the record, I would also have been both horrified and angry and everything else. Isaac, will you tell the story of, you've told it to me once before in a different context, about not really understanding racism, and you were running with some friends when you were in high school. I think it's such a, and then went home and Googled. So tell us if that story. An unusual use of Googling, I would add. Go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So going into my senior year of high school, I was a big fan of the social media network Tumblr, which was a mishmash of like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram back in the early 2010s. And on there one day I came across this hashtag called Blackout Day. And it was something that college students were doing in solidarity with, Black men that were killed by the police. And of course, as a 16-year-old growing up in my environment, this was a totally brand new concept to me. What I was coming across in this thread, police brutality, racism, seeing posts, where like all white people are racist, all these things that really had never come across my viewpoint before. But as a transracial adoptee, as a Black person, definitely feeling very confused. And so for a year of my life, I was in this internet world kind of trying to figure out this whole race thing and did a bunch of crazy things with my hair to try to express being Black. Then the night I turned 17, me and my friends, again, Lancaster, we were out for a walk late at night around some country fields. And we were, coming down this big hill. And at the top of the hill, there was a cop car that started like waving around like a flashlight, spotlight, looking for people. And, really scared that maybe somebody called and like we got a noise complaint. Me and my friends start running back to my parents' house. And as we're running, one of my friends shouts out, "It's all right. Isaac's the only one that's going to get in trouble." Mm-hmm. And I think for me, that was like it was almost like a key, like unlocking a door. Like I really understood that like a lot of the stuff that I was reading online, at least about racism, was true. And not only did my friends know about it, but if my friends knew about it, that meant like probably the people that I was living with in my community knew about it, and nobody had told me about it. Mm-hmm. And so that night for me became, I think, this awakening that I was going to have a different experience than I knew that I was going to have.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you talk to your parents about, were your parents aware that you were learning and going online trying to learn about racism? And did you tell them about this experience that you had?
Not until years later. I'm notoriously private to a fault. And on it now, I feel like me and my parents probably have a better relationship now than ever. But especially during these years, like I just did things. Like I just learned things, and like it was my world. Mm-hmm. And so no, we didn't have conversations about it. To be honest, I didn't really know what I would say, to be honest, either, because we had never really had those conversations. And like to me, there was nothing that I knew to say. And so, yeah, it didn't really come up until I was in college.
Is it fair to say you didn't have the context with which to talk?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just, what do you say? Like, I think in my mind, I was like, what do I even say? Like, am I supposed to just ask them if they're racist? So, it became like a little bit more of a, not even just me trying to be private, but a little bit of a confusing space to try to even bring up. And I think that's probably why, instead of it being a conversation, it was more of like they just kind of found out that I had different worldviews about race from the internet.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I think you use it as a time to pull away from us. And again, my mama bear kicked in, and I think everything we raised Isaac in, he was going to throw at us of, I don't agree with that. And I'm going to live the extreme opposite of this. It's just constant. And I remember us having a pretty heated argument one time and me just looking at him and saying, when are you going to understand that there's nothing you can say to me that's going to push me away? I'm not going to allow it. I'm just not. Like, I'm not allowing you to push me away, kind of thing. And I think that was we had to prove that to him, that even about race that we didn't understand and we made lots of mistakes and we had to own that, right? We had to own that, and we had to educate ourselves and realize, and we're still in the process of that. But I think that he was probably afraid to talk to us because not only did he not know what to say, but is this going to cause a fight because they don't agree with me?
Or separate me further from them.
Right.
And in a way, I'm pushing to separate because that's my normal stage of development. But on the other hand, I already am different. And will this just separate us too much? Or, all those.
Yeah.
So when did your awakening, Julia? One of the reasons I so wanted to interview the two of you together is that I am so impressed from what Isaac has said about you, that it would be easy I think so many parents, our tendency is to want to be defensive and to say, okay, wait a minute, I didn't screw you up that bad, or wait a minute, I did, that's, it's hard not to, as a parent, take that approach, but you didn't. And so first of all, were you even aware that he was online doing all this stuff?
Somewhat. I was aware that he was finding out a lot online. I didn't know about his Tumblr and I didn't know exactly what he was doing, but I'm pretty aware. We try to give our kids freedom to have space to figure themselves out, but also understanding kids and the internet can be very dangerous. So me trying to keep a watchful eye on what's going on. So I always say about my kids, I'm not naive. I know they're figuring things out, and I know they're online and they're looking up things, but I don't always know the details. And I would say that was probably true with Isaac. Yeah.
And his changing his hair, and I'm sure he was
right. Yeah.
He was also saying other things, probably, and was wanting to dress in certain ways, which were I have a question for you guys. Are you subscribers to the creatingafamily.org podcast? The advantage of being a subscriber, it helps us. So that's number one. But number two, it also helps you. We have more than 15 years, yes, count them, 15 years of archived shows, including many, many, many shows on transracial adoption. So once you subscribe, you can scroll through all those archives and click on the title will tell you whether it's covering transracial, and you can listen to all the old shows. And they don't go out of date. The information is still current. You can follow or subscribe to the creatingafamily.org podcast wherever you catch your favorite podcast. However you're listening to it now, there is a search button, and you can usually search for Creating a Family and then click subscribe or follow. Thank you. So what brought you to the realization that you needed some growth, you needed to grow in this area?
Well, first of all, I can't hardly talk about this without crying. So it's probably it's already happening a little bit. But
I was going to say, is one crier to another. I've got Kleenex here. Not going to help you.
So I don't remember the year, and I don't remember which brutality case this was, but there was a brutality case that had happened. And actually, it was the year, Isaac, you went to Atlanta for the summer, to Georgia for the summer for the first time. So it was right after I guess you would have been 18, right after you turned 18.
Yeah, right after.
And I remember watching across the news, there were riots in Dallas, and a few of the police officers at the riots were shot. I don't remember if you guys remember this. So it just all erupted into so much violence. And so that Saturday, there were just protests planned for everywhere. And one was in Atlanta. And I remember just thinking, oh my goodness, Isaac's going to be in Atlanta. He's probably going to go to this. And we haven't educated him. He doesn't know. Sorry, it's very hard to say that. And I just remember calling him and saying, Isaac, we have so many conversations to have, but please don't go to Atlanta tomorrow. Please don't don't do that. And so that was kind of the opening for me. Of course, the George Floyd case was huge, but I would say that my husband and I had already done so much. His sister, her senior year in high school, she was a competitive speech and debater. And she chose to do her senior year speech on Malcolm X, and in a Christian league, very conservative, knowing that it was a award-winning speech, but that she maybe wouldn't win awards because of the topic in that environment. And I remember her, I'm not going to get it completely correct, but basically her thesis was, if the church had loved Malcolm X like the Bible tells us to, would he have been pushed to the point that he was? And that made me like, oh, I want to read all about him. So I think it was just kind of like a family effort in wanting to understand and love Isaac better. And then when his younger brother, the next brother closest to him, who's 8, they're turning 19 actually next week, goodness, now became a teenager, and I realized I wasn't having the same talks with him. I wasn't saying, Zachary, you can't wear a hoodie or a baseball cap at night. I wasn't saying to him, keep your driver's license on the dashboard of your car so you're not having to go in the pockets of your car. And it was just like this dawning of, whoa, I have treated my Black son differently. There is a problem in this world that I'm having different talks with my Black son than I did my white son. And then I'm just, these are all like disjointed, but I don't know if I've ever told Isaac this. I'm embarrassed. I think I have, Isaac. It's an embarrassing thing to say, but I think it's important. I was driving in Lancaster City one time. And if I ever told you this, Isaac, I don't know. I'm sorry if I haven't.
Yeah. That's okay.
I was driving in Lancaster City one time. I stopped at a red light and someone knocked on my window, and out the corner of my eye, I could see a Black man, and it terrified me, absolutely terrified me. And when I turned and looked, and it was Isaac. And I went home and cried and cried and cried after that. So I don't know, it's just little things happening here and there that, as one of my friends told me one time, who's also white, who was going to a diverse church, she said, I just decided one day that even though I don't understand their pain and I've never experienced what's going on, I'm going to actually believe them that they are in pain and that these things are happening. And she said, once you decide to believe, the whole world is opened. And I think that was, all of these things took me to that place. And we started to believe and realized we had a lot of apologizing to do, a lot of educating ourselves to do, and our children, and we're still on that road. Yeah.
How did you, Isaac, from your perspective, how was your awareness of your parents shifting? And what did that do to both your relationship with them, but to your family? And I mean, growth is painful and change is painful. It's also necessary and healthy, but it's still scary, even for you, I suspect.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of while this was going on, I was on my own journey. And I think that it's another divine thing, right? As I think we have a lot of those things where, I left for Georgia at the end of my first semester of sophomore year. And a lot of the stories that my mom told, minus the ones involving me, a lot of them happened while I was gone. My sister chose to do that speech and debate topic. The kind of start of this journey, I had a wonderful mentor that became close friends with my family after I left, who was a Black professor at the college that I went to. A lot of this, I think, shift from my parents really happened during that time while I was kind of off trying to figure out, where did I fit into the world? So I was on this, solo identity journey, and certainly feeling some pain regarding my family and what I felt like they couldn't understand. But I think that that's a blessing because, one, like you said, growth is hard, and growth is also not in a straight line. And so I'm sure that, I'm sure that my parents had ups and downs. I'm sure they said things that I might have not been so graceful about during that period. I'm sure that it's a blessing that older mentors of mine and that their community, whoever was aware and bringing these topics up, were the people that they could go to grow and learn, and that I kind of got to come in closer to the back end.
Interesting.
You know what I mean? Because like I'm 18
Yes.
at the time, you know, like we just have to be honest. Like I obviously wasn't like gonna be the most gracious person in the world at 18.
Yeah,
So,
18-year-olds males are not always known for being the most accepting or
Yeah.
gracious, and perhaps nor should they be. Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's another thing that I think is just kind of life being beautiful, is that like they got to go on that journey and I got to go on my own and have a really separate experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Though I definitely was dealing with my own pain related to my family, it was really having a totally different experience. Like I was figuring out who I was in the Black community. I was making like my own friends. Like I was in community of all Black people for the first time in my life. Like I was having my own journey and my own identity search while they were able to go through this. And I think that kind of happening simultaneously, and then me moving back a year later, all worked out really well for us to kind of restart the conversation.
Because you had each of you grown separately, and your parents were willing. What is nice is that their love for you was the impetus, but they didn't depend on you to be their educator. They did that on their own, and
Absolutely.
yeah. I want to thank our partner, Vista Del Mar. They have been a longtime supporter of both Creating a Family, the nonprofit organization, but especially of this show. They are a licensed nonprofit adoption agency with over 65 years of experience helping to create families. They offer home study only services as well as full service infant adoption. They do international home studies as well as post adoption support for international families, and they have a foster to adopt program. You can find them online at vistadelmar.org/adoption. So, Julie, what do you wish you had known before you adopted a Black child?
Oh, a lot.
Yeah. Well, what specific? So you're talking to other parents now. So what would you have done differently, if anything? What do you wish people had told you? Because now you're going to be you have the opportunity to tell them.
Yes. So I think I'm just going to try to think from childhood through adulthood. I think initially just understanding that adoption in and of itself is hard. When we went to adopt our younger son later, Isaac was 10 at that time, and I feel like the classes that we had to take for Micah were more helpful to what we were dealing with Isaac at the time. But you know what? Yeah, one of the things that they told us in that class is that adoption is that it's the death of a relationship, and that the grief of death is cyclical, and you may think that you're over it, and then a pivotal moment in your life comes up, you're changing hormones, you're getting married, you're graduating, whatever, and that grief is going to come to the surface again. And I think that when you're transracially adopting, there is even more confusion because you've got the identity issues on top of the grieving this death of a relationship that never really goes away there because there's no closure, right? Mm-hmm. There's no closure in that. And so I think that understanding that you've got kind of two whammies coming at you when you transracially adopt, and being prepared for that. We could see that Isaac was struggling, but we thought, we can love him through this. We can love him through this. And that just is not what happens. Professional help is needed. And if I had it to do over again, we would have had Isaac in counseling, and we would have been in family counseling on a continual basis, probably even like for a lifetime, because this is such a cyclical grieving process. I definitely would have sought counsel from other Black parents about how to educate about racism without scaring them or making their lives miserable or whatever. I don't know, but how do you healthily educate your children about racism? And how do you protect them? Because I don't think it's bad to protect your kids, but how do you protect them while educating them? I think would be a pretty important thing. And, I don't know. Obviously I would have exposed him more. I think that's a given. I would have exposed him more to his culture. I remember my husband standing in the grocery store aisle one time because his skin was so dry, and just waiting for a Black family to come up and asking them what he just stood there waiting for someone Black to come up to ask, what's a good thing for me to put on his skin. Mm-hmm. So I just would have sought more education from other Black families on practical things. When we lived in Fredericksburg, there was an older Black lady in our church who would take Isaac once a month to like her family gatherings and do fun things like that with him, and like just exposing him to all of her family. And she would also take his sister at that time, who was a toddler. And when we moved to Pennsylvania, just out of busyness and chaos and being overwhelmed of restarting a life, we didn't find someone here to continue that practice. And I wish that we had found him Black mentors like that from the very beginning all the way through his adulthood. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Those are just practical things that I think of.
But practical things are exactly, but we want them to be, thank you. Practical is good.
Yeah.
Isaac, what do you want transracial adoptive parents to know?
I think, I'll just do an echo. You know what I mean? I think, we didn't practice, but, we've been having these conversations. I'm grateful that my parents have always been really supportive of my work in this space. And, a lot of the things that my mom shared are things that I share, which is that like racial mirrors, having your child in community that looks like them is always a big win. I think the therapy is also huge. That isn't as much. I haven't talked about that as much, but I think that also plays a huge factor when you're thinking about grief and loss. Mm-hmm. Because one, like everybody in the adoption sphere usually feels some kind of grief and some kind of loss, including the adoptive parents. And so I do think that family counseling, or at least counseling between my parents and I, would have been a great thing for us to have growing up. And maybe some things would have come out or come to the surface sooner. And so I think that's a great suggestion that my mom added. Then I think also like the commitment to learn, like a lot of this work, if you've adopted an infant or a 2-year-old or, a young child, right now you're not necessarily having the talk about like what to do when you get pulled over. Mm-hmm. But this is a great time to start learning, to start getting in different community. This is a great time to get yourself surrounded by people who will not only add value to your experience by maybe helping with hair, skin, culture, but also challenge you to really live up and to uphold the values and treat other people that look like your child the way that you would want your child to be treated. I think the car story my mom gave is just such a amazing example of something that I talk about all the time, which is that like the way you feel about people that look like your child is exactly how the world will treat your child. And I think that car story just sends that home, which is that, the tension was high when it wasn't me, but it dissipated when it was me. The true feeling about Black people in that story was the first feeling. I mean, that's obviously not a reflection of the current state my mom is in, but I think that is a really powerful story to capture that image for adoptive parents, to really say like, you've adopted this child, you have a commitment to prepare them for a world that's going to see them how you are seeing people that aren't your child, but look like them. And so, yeah, that would be like my advice, is to start this learning process and to really dedicate yourself to the lifelong journey of it.
We tell parents the first Black person in your life should not be your child.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, or person of color, regardless. Thank you so much, Isaac and Julie Etter, for being with us today to talk about transracial adoption, but most important, about what you've learned in the process, because I think hopefully we are all open to learning things in the process. Yeah. So thank you both. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. This has been great.